Can you hear us, Darcy? Thank you.
Good evening. This is the November 19th meeting of the Newcastle Planning Commission. I'm Charlie Gatzik, the chair. We will begin our meeting with a flag salute. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Who would like to call the roll? Tyler, would you call the roll? We have one excused absence with Commissioner Lowe. Here.
Present.
Here.
Commissioner Blocker.
Here.
Vice Chair Trotman.
Here.
Chair Gatzik.
Here. All right, next item is the agenda approval. Does anybody have any amendments to the agenda? Saying none, we'll consider that approved. That brings us to our public comment period. We have some folks in the audience. If you'd like to step to the podium now. As always, let us know who you are. Tell us what neighborhood you're from if you live in Newcastle, and you've got 3 minutes. Why don't you set your exhibits first, and then be sure to hit the button to turn on the microphone. Oh, okay, it's on now. I have a suggestion. We all have copies, I think, of that. If it's okay, well, I would suggest you turn the other one around and face the camera so that people who are watching, it's up there. So I would put it in front of Commissioner Lowe's, right there, where there's, yeah, right there. Yeah, turn it a little bit to center. There you go.
Hi, I'm Arnie Arnovic. I live on Lake Kathleen, and so technically I'm not in Newcastle proper, but I do represent Jan Drange, who I think most of you are familiar with. She owns a lot on Lake Bourne. Unfortunately, she can't be here tonight, but she has asked me to read her statement. This is Jan speaking. I've learned a lot about building on waterfront in the past few months. I have spoken with a few lawyers, builders, real estate agents, and wetland biologists. They all agree on 2 things. 1, the current and proposed regulations reduce the value of my property by hundreds of thousands of dollars. And 2, the Newcastle Code is set up in such a way that I have no way to challenge it without changing the zoning ordinance, even if I have a valid argument given the existing circumstances with my property. I propose to do just that. It is not a matter of giving my property special consideration. It is a matter of treating it the same as all the neighbors on the lake, and I feel I can justify it. First of all, I would like you to look at the map in front of you that I have provided. All the existing homes and/or outbuildings are set back within 20 to 70 feet from the waterfront, irrespective of wetlands. Second, all houses have a panoramic view of the lake, not their neighbors' houses. Those features are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Notice also that all properties show a tax valuation of approximately $780,000. However, zoning setbacks, let's see, I missed my spot here. However, zoning ordinance mandate that my property be treated very differently. Any buildings have to be set back, in our case, about 140 feet from the lake. We expect 20 feet for the critical area, 110 for the buffer, and then another 10. That's how we got the 140. Double the average setback for the other houses. Also, that setback eliminates the panoramic view to a slot view that includes the neighbors' houses and garages. Additionally, building that far back from the water, because of the topography, changes the noise nuisance level from moderate to high due to the close proximity to Coal Creek Parkway and its traffic, thereby additionally reducing the property value. In other words, while all other property is valued the same, my lot is not.
Go ahead, you can finish up, as long as you're getting close.
I got another half a page.
Go ahead.
Okay. In other words, while all the property is valued the same, my lot is not worth anywhere near as much as the others with the same configuration in the immediate area. Yet we have dutifully paid the same property tax over the last 68 years, and as you can see, over 60% of the land is deemed to be totally unusable to the property owner. I propose that the council grant me relief of the hardship by considering Lake Bourne as a lake for the purpose of setback and use. That would entail using a setback that would allow a home on my lot to be constructed at the same distance from the shore as the average of the distances for the two houses adjacent to me. Everyone I talked to suggested this is a common variance or deviation to address real-life situations such as this. It all comes back to the terms reasonable and fair. I realize that Newcastle considers Lake Bourne a protected wetland rather than a lake. However, historically it's been considered a lake and treated as one with a wide variety of recreational activities. Realistically, in most ways it still is. The Washington Department of Wildlife stocks Lake Bourne with trout for fish. King County considers it a lake for tax purposes. Lake Bourne Park, a city park, provides a fishing pier and encourages people to bring their small boats to fish. The city of Newcastle provides a swimming dock. It has a beautiful grassy park for people to enjoy the water, and kids are often found swimming on the shoreline. Additionally, most houses have docks, paddle boards, boats, and manicured, actively used yards to the shoreline. All these activities are lake activities, the antithesis of wetland activities, which typically require protected buffers, wetland vegetation management, fencing, signage, and restrictions of all human activity. Yet all of the current and historical recreation activities are encouraged by the city and the county, and these activities are funded by the taxpayers through property taxes and fees. Needless to say, the city and the general public have and continue to use this lake as recreational amenity, not as protected habitat, and the code should not directly conflict with its use. While best scientific practices show that 110-foot setbacks maintain or improve water quality in wetlands, I doubt that that benefit is achieved when all the neighborhood parcels in the city invite a wide variety of recreational activities, human activities, in the same water and shores. And given the proposed changes to the ordinance, never will. Best scientific evidence notwithstanding, does anyone here seriously believe that 70-foot setbacks versus 140 will impact water quality or wildlife on Lake Bourne, given all of these historical and current recreational activities? My neighbors all have get-togethers, barbecues, and occasional weddings in their lakeside yards, which increase their personal enjoyment and property values. Would you buy this property knowing that you will never be able to do those things? I would have no access to the waterfront side of the property, and the north edge of the property nearby abuts Coal Creek Parkway. This represents a personal loss of quality of life and is isolating and contrary to building a community, all of which translate to a significant loss of property value, or what is commonly referred to as a hardship. I am not asking for special treatment for my parcel. I just want my parcel to be treated the same as my neighbors. I realize you are not obligated to grant a variance or deviation based on the hardship that has been created by the codes, but I sincerely request that you consider it. Respectfully, Jan Grange. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Arnovic. Commissioner Fitzgibbons, we're going to be talking about wetlands setbacks and buffers a little bit later on our agenda. Would you give us some background at that point in the agenda to give us a little context for this particular situation? Yeah. The next up is, well, I should say, next up is anybody else who wants to make a public comment. Is anybody else here would like to make a comment? No? Okay. We'll close the public comment period then. And we go to commissioner comments, and why don't we start here with Vice Chair Troutman and move to our left.
Thank you, Chair Gadzik. I'm glad to be here with you all. I appreciate the people who've come out to attend the meeting as well. I think that's critically important. We want to do the best we can to represent the concerns of the people. Thank you.
I'm going to echo the same sentiments. I really appreciate the total engagement from all our residents of the city of Newcastle on this issue, and I think all commissioners here are in consensus that we'll do whatever is needed to make sure we accommodate the requests that are coming through. Thank you.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Yes, thanks for coming. I don't know if you follow the CAC or the Community Activities Commission, but they, in our comp plan, we put that 10-minute walk shed, and they have been revamping it, adding parks from Bellevue and Renton, and getting some better data to recalculate it. So it was I just thought I'd share that. I think it's neat that it's being used and developed and talked about. And there also, if you haven't taken, there's a survey for the 95th Street property that's floating around on social media and on the email if you get that. But take that survey because they're trying to figure out what to do with that piece of land.
Good evening, everyone, and glad you came, staff especially. No more comment.
Thank you. I don't have any comment, but we'll move to the reports. And I do have a short report as the chair, which is that we have filled our vacancy, or I should say the council has filled the vacancy on the Planning Commission. Our new commissioner's name is Chris Beeson. She is a person who has a long career in construction management. I think she's an engineer by training. She's worked in roles all the way up to being the CEO of a construction company, and now she is a consultant that advises construction companies. So she couldn't make it to tonight's meeting, but I'm pretty sure she'll be here for our December meeting. Mm-hmm. Very good. Director Fitzgibbons, would you like to report?
I was just going to respond if everybody saw the email from the Adamses earlier, but I can also make that kind of part of my discussion. Oops, sorry, on the critical areas instead. I'll just hold on to that.
Okay, we don't have any public hearings tonight, so we'll move to general business, which is the critical areas ordinance. And turn it back to you, Director Fitzgibbons.
Thank you. First things first, I do need to do a mic check one more time. Darcy, you can hear us? Oh, but we can't hear you. Okay. Tyler, could you try unclicking that box? Can you try again, Darcy?
Yes, testing.
Oh, there you are. Darcy, just so you know, there's a slight delay between when you speak and then we hear what you're saying. So just if we seem like we're lagging, we probably are. Okay, so I'll just Can everybody see that? I think I have to share my screen through Zoom as well. That's the wrong one. Let's see here. All right, critical areas ordinance. I think this is our 4th meeting on critical areas, or 5th. Today's update, I'm just going to give a quick update on the status update on the stream buffers. We'll talk about we'll go through the big substantive changes that were recommended before this latest version of the code change tracker. And then we'll review those changes in the code change tracker that have been made since September. And the goal tonight is to wrap up discussions on items except for the streams related topics. Because we have contracted with Facet, who is another, they are a wetland firm, and they're also civil engineers. And they have worked on several other jurisdictions, best available science and gap analysis is what they call it. They're working on one specific to the city of Newcastle right now. In the beginning of December, they and myself and Darcy are meeting with the Department of Fish and Wildlife to go over our recommended changes and our data. And in the meanwhile, they're going to be working on what they call a GIS dashboard for critical areas. So they're actually creating a map which property owners will be able to access, and they'll be able to see the effects of current regulations and proposed regulations on their individual properties. And of course, we'll all be able to see that as well. They've done this for the city of Medina, so I'm excited to see this. Tyler did some great mapping initially, but he's only one person, so it'll be nice to have let him work on some other things too. So, in terms of the substantive changes that we made before you saw the code change tracker for tonight. If you recall, we utilized the ecology guidance to keep the wetland buffers the same as what they currently are. So our wetland buffers were set in to what they are, I think in 2015, definitely before I started in 2018. They are the same. They look a little different because the wetland buffer, instead of it being combined between the wetland, a moderate impact and a high impact, and that has to do with the use on the property. Now we've broken that out, and again, this is based directly on what ecology had in their guidance. And before, what we had to do was, in order to get that buffer that's in the current code, you'd have to meet you'd have to do certain best practices, like aiming lights away from the wetland, or making sure that water is filtered before it goes into the wetland. And if you didn't, staff were supposed to impose a 33% increase in the buffer. Now what it is I think it's clearer now, because it says, okay, you can have this one. If you do these things, you get this moderate buffer, and if you don't, you get this high impact buffer. So people will be doing the same things they were required to do before. It's just that it's very clear what the difference is. We're not changing the geologic hazard buffer, so that's coal mines, steep slopes, erosion hazards, all those. It's not substantively changing. You may have seen in the red lines and the code change tracker some small modifications and clarifications, which we can definitely talk to tonight if you saw anything. But otherwise, the policies around geologic hazards haven't really changed. We are looking to bring back a building structure setback from the buffer because the way the code is written now, there is nowhere people can build their homes, right, or their buildings right up to the critical areas buffer, which means in order to maintain those structures, they have to go into the critical area buffer, which is often planted with native plants under mitigation requirements. They have to go into the buffer in order to maintain their structures. So the idea is just to give some space in there. You could still, the way we have it written now, you could still build a deck, you could, have your dogs run around, kids. It's just that we don't want that primary structure right up to the buffer. And most other cities have this. And ours is actually low on the lower side. A lot of cities are doing 15 to 20 foot buffers instead of the 10. And again, we have written in an exception. If there's an existing home and we see that it presents a hardship, you can apply for an administrative variance based on the criteria that's already in the code. But still, the reduction would only be down to 5 feet. It wouldn't be no buffer. We have written in that non-conforming structures in wetlands and streams to be able to be rebuilt in the same footprint. We do have in the code, as it's presented tonight, we do show that we are allowing expansion up to 500 feet in previously disturbed areas, which could even be something, we define it as altered areas in our code. And that could be anything from graveled, impervious areas, lawn, anything that's not native pristine. And Darcy, please feel free to talk over me if I'm saying anything incorrectly, by the way. Also, the mitigation.
Good so far.
Okay, good. Thanks. I don't know if you all recall Darcy Miller. I didn't introduce her earlier, but we've worked with her for a long time, and she's a wetland scientist with Shockey. Anyway, the mitigation monitoring timeframe, we've suggested that if you're meeting all of your mitigation requirements and you have a site that's the mitigation for monitoring is, that site is 2,500 square feet or less, you can reduce your amount of time from the 5-year monitoring period to 3 years. And again, we chose that 2,500 square feet because that is what we currently have as the cutoff for requiring a clear and grade permit in the code. So people who don't even, people can go out and do vegetation management on their own properties for under 2,500 square feet without a clear and grade permit, unless they're clearing trees, and then that's a whole other thing. But if you're just doing vegetation management, you can do that at under 2,500 feet. So we stuck with that threshold there. And then the other thing that we talked about was mitigation trees for critical area mitigation cannot double count for significant tree retention. So applicants will still have to come in and they can do their mitigation plantings, and whatever those native plantings are for the particular habitat, they would do those, and then they would have to do their significant tree retention calculations separately. That's how the code has been interpreted, but it's not clarified in the code that way. So we have had confusion over that in my time here, and so we just wanted to make that clarification. Are there any questions on what I just talked about before we move on to the code change? Tracker. What?
Quick question, just for clarification. You said on that mitigation monitoring time frame, 5 to 3 years for smaller projects, and you said 2,500 square foot. What is that?
So the area of the mitigation planting would be 2,500 square feet or less. It would be a pretty small area. So.
You mentioned an administrative variance, apparently would be a staff decision.
Right.
Would Ms. Grange fall under that category in this case or not?
So just a pure read of the code. I can't talk to, there's some things that were brought up tonight that I can't talk to. But looking at her lot, and this goes to what Charlie asked me to discuss earlier, but she has room on the northern end of her lot to develop a home. And so it would be likely viewed as a grant of special privilege to allow her to to go into that buffer area. So that variance, we don't allow variances currently to the critical areas code. So this would be the only time any kind of variance would be allowed to the critical areas code.
Great, thank you.
So, any other questions?
I'm not sure what the limits are about what you can discuss, but is Newcastle, can Newcastle choose between classifying Lake Bourne as a wetland or a lake?
Darcy, is that something you can answer off the top of your head?
I'm not totally prepared to get into the details, but basically it is a lake, but it has wetlands fringing around just about all of it, and so that is why we have considered it to be a wetland. Generally, I can get more detail for everyone on that after the meeting.
Thank you. Yeah, so I haven't heard anything about being able to change between different classifications. I do know that, like Lake Washington, for example, is subject to Shoreline Management Act, which Lake Bourne is not because it's not considered a shoreline of the state. I think that probably plays into the classification of lake versus,
Yes.
This is a non-navigable body of water according to the state. So a shoreline management plan, which again, Lake Washington, Lake Sammamish, are subject to, would have a whole different set of requirements that Lake Bourne is not subject to.
Right. Right.
The questions before us tonight about buffers, do the things that we might be giving our assent to tonight just informally, do they change what is already required of this lot?
The 110-foot building setback would be the difference. So without the 110, I'm sorry, I said 110, but I meant 10. The 10-foot building setback from the critical areas boundary would be the one difference because it's requiring from the buffer that you can't build a building right up next to the buffer.
From the look of this, though, the older homes were built under a different code. The existing code that you said has been in effect since probably 2015. If these homes were built today, they would all have to be pushed back, so any new home has to be built to the current code. Is that correct?
It is, and it might help for me to talk to a map a little bit, just so you can see the difference in these different, you can see how I would look at it from my position. So this is King County IMAP. I'm just looking at it for the aerial so I can kind of show you the difference between these different lots. You've probably read about the reasonable use exception process in the code. The reasonable use exception is when applying the code, strict application of the code, would remove all reasonable use from the property, like pretty much all ability to use the property. So going through a reasonable use exception, which is in a way a kind of a variance process, that is how, for example, 13021 here, which was sinking, is able to be rebuilt. They had to go through a reasonable use process because you can see the way that this property is, there's not 110 feet from this bulkhead here, which is the edge of the wetland, to the north. And that's the same way that a house here at 7608 was built. But let's say 7804 wanted to rebuild their home. And they wanted to tear down, because some of these homes are from like the 1920s and 40s, I believe. They would have to tear down, I mean, if they tore down their home, and then they would have to build at 110 feet out, because they would have the room for it. You can see 7808, 7810, those are both newer, and they were both built further landward. So it's, and we're going to talk about this a bit during our nonconformance discussions, but it takes a long time for development to catch up with regulation in terms of existing uses. And just from a purely code, viewpoint, and sometimes I hate doing this because it feels very cold, but just from a purely code viewpoint, this parcel can be developed normally and avoid without needing exceptional, like a reasonable use.
Commissioner Blocker?
Director, can you count on your fingers and tell us how many undeveloped lots front the lake? On your, if you back out a little ways?
I think it's, is it 3 now? Because all these properties are owned by the city. So it is this one here, this one here, which, as we passed the Waterfront Development Code in 2018, can no longer be developed. And this one here. I don't know, actually, is there a house on 7? I think it's just being covered by, oh yeah, it is there.
So 3.
3.
And I think you showed us a close-up of a lot on the west side of the lake where there has been recent construction, and those houses were built to that new standard where they're quite a distance from the water.
Here.
Further up, I think, actually.
These two, and then
Oh, yeah, and yeah,
this one here, which is only allowed to be built pretty much in this area. And they had to come in for a reasonable use exception. And then this property here, but it is outside of the buffer.
I don't know what the solution is, but it seems, if, in a perfect world, these lots could be developed like all of the surrounding lots, because they're not going to cause substantial change to the ecology of the lake. The intent of the buffer regulations are to protect the water quality. We have a lake that is 95% developed, and we have a few outlying properties where, if they were developed according to the old standard, there probably wouldn't be any material impact on the water quality or on other things. That's layman's opinion. So I would like to see a way for Ms. Strange to be able to develop her property. And we're not going to solve this tonight, but I guess I would just ask that maybe we, at some point, we have a deeper conversation where we can go into this and get a better understanding of the implications, and also if there are any options. I don't know that there are, given the ordinances and the state laws that we need to comply with. Commissioner Blocker?
I second what you just said. I do have one more question, Aaron. The lot that you showed us on the north end of the lake there, the little wedge, how did that ever get allowed to be developed or segregated, let's say, as a lot? It doesn't have enough square footage for anything.
It's just old. It's historic. Yeah, I don't know how they ended up tying these two together, but that's a piece of history I'm unsure of.
just off the top of your head, kind of roughly, what use can that land be used for?
Well, it's R6, but it's also part of the Aegis property. This is called a quarter section map. Without knowing the exact square footage of it, if it's under 2,500 square feet. It can't be used for a home or anything. They wanted to build a dock for their residents to be able to, like, kind of like a little park and dock for their residents to be able to go out there. But for some reason, that project stopped. They never did it. But now the way that the code is written, they can't because it's too narrow of a frontage. So, if it's larger than 2,500 square feet, I think in theory it could be used for a residence if it was sold, if it was segregated and sold off, but I don't think it could be segregated legally. It's kind of an exercise I'm not 100% sure on.
So effectively, we're talking about 2 lots now.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose so. This one and that one. We can talk to the impacts of development adjacent to Lake Boren at a future meeting. Obviously, we're not prepared to talk about that tonight. Another thing to do is to consider is that there are septic tanks still on Lake Boren, and so we would want these homes to redevelop and get on sewer over time for anyone who is, I don't know how many are still on septic, but because they leach and they do contaminate the lake. But yeah, we can talk about the effects of impervious surface and why that distance is beneficial to the lake at a future meeting.
So just to
Aaron, can I add something?
the other things we're working on tonight.
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Darcy.
I was just going to, oh, okay. I was just going to add that I found the email I worked with Ecology to just verify that the lake would be, rated as a wetland in a whole. And it is because it is less than 20 acres in size. When that is the case, the wetland is rated as a depressional wetland. It's not like a lake with separate fringe wetlands on the outside. So that is in the Washington State Wetland Rating System Manual. So anyway, just wanted to add that.
Thank you.
Sure, thanks.
Anyway, the point I wanted to make is that we can move ahead with our conversation and any decisions we make about wetland buffers tonight. And the only change it would make to Ms. Strange's property is the 10-foot buffer. Because every problem that she has with this is a problem with things that exist now and not with what we're proposing. So there's no urgency for us to deal with this individual thing before we have a better grounding in it.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to the code change tracker. I have sorted this by just the new proposals. There are 38. And please stop me if you want to talk about something further. And Darcy, please stop me if you need to stop me. And that goes for anyone, really. So I'm looking here in column F. This is just adding a definition of agricultural activities, which was suggested from Ecology. I do think that the concept comes up in our code, so now we have a definition for it, per ecology. Darcy, do you want to say anything about this in particular?
What number are you? I'm sorry, I can't see that tiny little screen. I see your presentation.
Oh, you do?
Sorry.
Oh, that's weird. Okay, hold on, let me stop sharing and I'll try again.
Thanks.
Share. Do you see it now?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. Okay, so we are on,
So you're discussing the agricultural.
Yeah.
No, this was just a direct suggestion from ecology, right? So.
Yep. Okay, a new definition for non-federally regulated wetland. So they recommended that ecology recommended we replace hydraulically isolated wetland to this.
And that's just more specific. There are other ways that a wetland can be not regulated, not just by being isolated. So it just gives a more general term.
Okay, so this next line then just removes the old term. The third on row 6 here, this is just typos and changing the wetland rating publication to just say currently approved so that we don't have to keep updating the manual and the code every time it changes. On the next one, ecology suggested that we remove this particular guidance name from our code. On row 8, ecology suggested that we add emergency activities. Do you want to talk to that, Darcy?
No, again, this was just a general suggestion. They gave us the exact language. It's just to clarify things and bring in those terms that are in the joint guidance for mitigation, restoration, rehabilitation, or replacement. So I don't think that's too controversial or anything, but if anyone has questions, of course, we can answer them.
The next is from DFW, which they just suggested this clarification to include body of water that supports fish life. Sorry.
Basically on that one, sorry, sometimes,
Go ahead.
sometimes there are ditches and swales that, even though they are human-made, they may contain fish. So it's protecting those features. I don't think that's too common of a situation in the city, but.
No. Row 10 here is what I discussed earlier, where we were talking about allowing expansion into previously disturbed areas. That does not move closer to the critical areas. So that's in terms of allowing something to be rebuilt in the footprint plus up to 500 square feet one time into the critical areas or into the disturbed areas. Again, that can be a driveway or lawn or something that isn't native. I just lost my spot. Okay. Next one is a clarification again, just talking about natural blockage instead of lawful. And whether or not it's resulting from human-induced actions. But basically, a blockage we look at, and whether or not fish can bypass an area. Suggested change from DFW to disclose critical areas buffers, not just, this just clarifies that we are saying not just critical areas, but also critical areas buffers, which is implied when we do critical areas reviews, but just changes that definition. Or it changes that code to clarify that. We mean the buffers as well. Row 13. Just talks about delineations and mitigation sequencing. Basically saying these are actions that you need to show us that you have tried before you can say that you need to somehow disturb a wetland or a critical area buffer or a critical area. And sequencing is something that's been laid out in the code for a long time. So those things that people should try doing is alternative building locations, adjusting the footprint and orientation, modifying non-critical area setbacks where feasible as a first option before encroaching into critical areas, and or multi-story design and alternate building design. So those are all things people should try before they say that they have to mitigate for their impacts, or they can't avoid mitigation requirements. Again, this next one was expanded upon because the Department of Ecology suggested it and staff took no, it was just a clarification regarding mitigation banks.
Would you hold on a second?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was looking at the one above it. I'm sorry, you said, I thought I heard you say mitigation bank.
Ah, yes, so that's.
And I don't see that in that row 14.
Mhm.
Oh, and I do see it now, okay. Okay, I just had a question about mitigation banks, is that something that the people in Newcastle who are living close to a stream or a wetland that want to do something with their property, is that something that that can help them do what they would like to do with their property, and how would that work?
I think I'm gonna let Darcy talk to that one, because I've only seen it used twice now.
Sure. Yeah, so there are not mitigation banks that are serviced in that specific area. So we use something similar called the Kane County Wetland Mitigation Reserves Program. You'll see listed there. But there are every now and then new mitigation banks opening up. So that's why we wanted to keep that in the code, that if a bank is developed in the future, we certainly suggest use of that. But currently, we do allow people to use the Kane County Wetland Mitigation Reserve Program. And what that is you calculate how much impact you're having, assuming it's an allowed impact, and then you calculate it, and there's a formula for figuring out how much you pay towards that, into that reserve program with King County. So that it's acting like a mitigation bank, but it's not quite set up in the same way. Because they just have a big fund that they use to work on various mitigation projects versus a mitigation bank, which is just one bank. It's there, you can go see it, and that's how you're paying money into that bank to to keep it going actually after it's already been built. But does that answer your question?
Sort of, part of it. The real thing I was asking is can you use these mechanisms to do something on your property because you're offsetting that impact by the use of the mitigation bank or the King County mechanism that you described? I mean, is that what this is? Can it be used in that way?
So kind of when would you use it, Darcy?
Yeah, this is acceptable. Oh, sorry. What's that?
Oh, sorry, that's that lag. I was just saying
What, Aaron?
when can you use it and who does use these?
Yeah, well, imagine you have an allowed impact. So a road has to come through wetland to get to the rest of your parcel. That's allowed, like you can't avoid it. And so you're gonna hit 5,000 square feet of wetland. That instead of like doing wetland mitigation on your property, you can buy into that King County Wetland Mitigation Reserves Program. And that, yes, that's your mitigation. That's all you have to do, is pay that money. But you have to make sure that it's allowed. It's not like you can just decide, I want to build, a huge development on this lot here, and I'm just gonna fill all these wetlands, 2 acres of wetlands. So first we have to make sure you've gone through the avoidance and minimization sequencing, and it's an allowed impact to begin with.
So it wouldn't
Then you
apply.
go into the mitigation.
It wouldn't apply to a situation like we were talking about earlier with with Jan Drange and her property, because that's not an allowed use. Okay.
Right.
Commissioner Blocker, do you have a question?
Yeah.
It was what you just covered there.
Director Fitzgibbon?
Sir.
You and I talked about this a little bit before the meeting started, but it sounds to me like this mitigation bank is analogous or a substitute for in lieu fees. You can pay to play, so to speak. Is that a true statement or a reasonable understanding?
Yeah, I think in a way it is an in lieu fee, and sometimes it's a preferred route to creating an area that has to be maintained. I think there's some skepticism on ecology's side now from what I've heard from working on different projects, that they prefer sometimes that you do something like a mitigation program rather than doing on-site mitigation for impacts.
Well, I've got.
It is actually the preferred priority choice is to use a mitigation bank or in lieu fee program or mitigation reserves program versus on-site. It's not always what makes sense, but it's usually what is preferred. It's the priority number one. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no,
There's a
that's
lag.
good. That's good. I was being cautious in my statement because I am not a wetland scientist, so.
Yeah.
Well, I've got you, Director. Can you go back up to 8F?
Yes.
And you spoke, there's verbiage in there about emergency activities. Can you give me examples of what that might entail? In terms
yeah.
of how it affects the land use and whatnot?
Yeah. So one that I can think of that's very real is there's a hazardous tree in there's a hazardous tree in a critical area, and it's in imminent danger of falling down. You don't have to go out and do a survey and talk about how you're going to mitigate that tree.
Perfect.
You go out and you tear that tree, you take it down.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah. Let's see here. Watershed approach should be used to determine the type of wetland mitigation proposed for a project. Resource,
I think that's.
oh, sorry, I did that one. I'm on the next one. Oh my goodness, it keeps jumping. I'm really sorry, y'all. Okay, an applicant, okay, this is just a quick. It's changing a shall to a may, basically is what it's doing. Between off-site and on-site mitigation. It just means that there are options for people that are coming up against things that are allowed on their property and ways of mitigating for that. State priority habitat species discussion here. This is just a different way of saying what we were saying. And it's specific to how DFW wants recommendations published to be put into code. It's not controversial, it's just a rewording. Let's see here. The RIA plans. Do you want to, did I say that right, Darcy? Is it RIA? WRIA?
Yes. Yeah, water resources inventory area.
So we're in area 8. And they added this watershed scale impacts because, just as an additional consideration for areas addressed in a critical area report, is that it? They just want us to look broadly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. So the discussion, Darcy, I'm sorry, I'm kind of putting Darcy on the spot here. Stream buffers do not expand across developed public roads and rights of way. There's been a lot of discussion behind the scenes about public rights of way and how they intersect with wetlands and streams. Generally, Darcy, do you want to say anything about that and the changes that people see in the code? This just clarifies it a little bit. You can still have that public right of way and road stopping a buffer, basically. But now a wetland biologist has to kind of defend that and explain that in their report, and saying that yes, the buffer doesn't continue across that road at all. There's no functional application. There's no functions happening on the other side of the road that protect the wetland. So it's just adding another little piece to what they need to describe in their report. It's like it's not just that every single buffer stops at a road. It probably stops at a road, but you need to tell me why nothing's going on the other side of the road. So.
And again, this next row 21, is also regarding stream buffers and interacting with roadway types. And when we can approve a modification. I think it just gives us more.
Right, this goes into more of the detail of, oh, sorry. It just goes into more of the detail of how you would show that there is no functional, no functions going on the other side of the road. It's just a continuation from the other one above.
Good. Right. Again, a couple of suggestions from DFW about trails through buffers. These are givens when we're doing reviews. However, having them in code is helpful. One of those situations. So we want trails to be put in places where they're not going to take down trees or interrupt important vegetation. And then, of course, impacts have to be fully mitigated, which we would already require if there are any impacts, but it's just putting that in the code. We're getting jumpy again. Route 22, if you're following along. 23 now, crossing is constructed during the in-water work window. This has to do with when you can do work when you can actually build crossings, stream crossings. So it has to be done in the work window established by DFW and that's usually through permits that you get through DFW, so that's just clarifying that. Crossing does not, and then again, we're talking about stream crossings. And practices described in incorporating, they gave us a reference document here, so that's helpful. For line 25, these are just clarifications, kind of Scrivener's changes. The 26 adds invasive species are allowed, any kind of invasive species would be allowed as a vegetation removal, not just these Himalayan blackberry and evergreen blackberry. Oh, shoot. And thank you for nobody snoring yet. Number 14, again, we're updating the reference document for the wetland rating system, the 2014 document. Site shown on inventories depicting potential natural resources, wetlands. So again, these are updates to resources for folks to use when they're preparing their documents for city review or even agency review. Sometimes it goes up to them. Department may approve reduction of a standard wetland buffer width. So this is what we were talking about earlier, how there are different intensity uses for buffers. And this is how we would be allowing folks to keep those buffers as they currently are. And this is from the guidance. If that made sense. Darcy, is there anything you think we should mention in terms of change of policy from our current on this 29?
No, this just offers those who are proposing to do high impact, like a residential development, just offers them some relief and brings it down to what we have as the current highest buffer size. So if they can't provide these minimization measures, as they're called, then they would have a larger buffer than what is required right now. But most people are able to do these minimization measures. They're just like, well, there's a list in another part of the code, but it's like pointing lights away at night, reducing noise, especially during construction. Don't let pesticides and herbicides run into the wetland, that sort of thing. So they're quite doable measures. So yeah, this is really just helps those high impact situations get a slightly smaller buffer.
Thank you. Again, here's clarification on how wetland buffers, we were talking about streams before, and how they intersect with developed public roads and rights of way. And again, whether or not, how the biologist has to say whether or not the buffer continues on the other side.
Parallel to the stream buffer section.
Yeah, thank you. And then Under 31, buffers may exclude areas that are functionally and effectively disconnected from the wetland by an existing public or private road. So we go further into how to review whether or not a wetland buffer continues on the other side of a road.
And this, I will say, this language is recommended by Ecology, and I heard it from about 3 different people at Ecology when I was talking to them about certain projects or code stuff. So they really want to get that language in there, and I think pretty much everyone's adopting that. It just clarifies what's usually a very gray area in a code. So.
Thank you. More regarding roads. Again, from Ecology. Acreage replacement ratio, we deleted the table of the acreage replacement ratios for wetland mitigation, and we put in a revised table. So we just replaced the table. For replacement ratios, which is part of the mitigation, depending on different criteria. Again, another reference update. DFW suggested that to our reasonable use exception criterion, these are those right here. There's no other reasonable use with less impact on the critical area. The inability, this is an important one for any kind of variance or generally, is that the inability to derive a reasonable economic use is not the result of the applicant's actions or that of a previous property owner, such as by rezoning, segregating, or dividing the property and creating an undevelopable condition. So did you put yourself in this situation is what that question is saying. And DFW is suggesting that we add rezoning, and one would hope someone would not get a rezone on their own lot and then not be able to develop. But I think that would be a very rare case because we seldom have zoning requests in the city. So they suggested we added it, and we did not see an issue with it. Priority species, definition from DFW. And the last one, stream channel stabilization, and this actually is consistent with our codes for, that we have for waterfront development, that we adopted in 2019, I think. Where we're not allowing hard armoring, which is like a bulkhead, or stream channel stabilization happening through concrete channels or whatnot. It would be by using sort of soft techniques, such as what they say, like vegetative plantings, natural materials. People use logs, other kinds of things to help prevent erosion. And it's shown to be more effective. So anyway, phew, we made it through those. That concludes this portion of my presentation. Thank you for going through that with me.
Any lingering questions?
I got 2. So, up top was the non-conforming code. Like, it was early on in this list.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you can find it. We'll test you out here, Aaron. With the 5, I think it's right there. Is it
Mhm.
10? So, how does this intersect with the rule around like 50% of the building, value? How does?
So critical areas codes specifically regulate critical areas. So this would be what happens in a critical area. When we update the nonconformance code, we should add a reference talking about critical areas back to this because it's related but separate. But the critical areas code basically says where there's conflict in the code, critical areas code rules, as applicable.
But, okay, so let me give you an example. So if there's a house that, a tree falls down the middle of it and it's because it's 50%, right, of the value that
Yeah.
kicks in. They could rebuild that house though, same footprint. Assuming, somewhere
Oh, I
along
see
the
what
line there, the buffer moved inward.
Yeah, so in our current code,
Yeah,
they'd have to bring the whole lot up to compliance, even if it meant going through an RUE.
okay,
In our proposed code, what we're saying is you can reuse the footprint and you can expand one time up to 500 square feet
feet,
away from the critical area buffer into degraded buffer area. So it can't be closer, and it has to be an area that's already like not pristine, basically.
so it's independent of the value?
So that value, that comes in for all other nonconformities, so that comes
Yeah.
in now, but if this passes the way if this is adopted the way it's written, that valuation would no longer pertain to this
Okay.
situation. It would still pertain in other situations, which we might get to tonight. But like if somebody's house, if somebody wants to remodel their house and the value of the construction is over half the assessed value of the improvement,
Mhm.
so they have, their house is, assessed at 500,000, they want to do $300,000 worth of work, then they have to bring the whole site up to compliance.
Okay. Okay. And then my other question was on your slide at the beginning, you talked about keeping the wetland buffers the same. Is there a chart for that?
Yeah, so, in the code,
Because I didn't see it in these code
yeah.
spreadsheet we just went over.
No, it was in the red lines because it's hard to put a chart in the tracker. And hopefully this will work in future presentations of zoning code update. What we're gonna do is we're gonna do the red lines and we're gonna use comments rather than two separate documents, because I think it'll be a lot easier when you see contextually the changes and why we've made them. We've had some issues with the Excel spreadsheet working across over SharePoint, so
Mhm.
as you might have noticed. So anyway, that was tangential, but we have, let's see here, 1824, oh, sorry, excuse my scrolling. Coal mine hazards, So,
Keep going, it's 1824, 315.
it is 3:15. Oh, all right, I'm getting there. Okay,
Pretty
so
far
we took
down.
out, yeah, I took out the old code, or we took out the old code.
Okay.
I did, I didn't. And then this is the new table. And so there are these moderate impact land uses, which we were saying, if you do certain best practices, you can get these buffers, but if you,
Hey, Aaron, could you click the little plus sign and just zoom in just a titch?
I can try. Like, yeah?
There you go. That's helpful.
Yeah, and I don't know why my screen doesn't go all the way down to the bottom, but it's not coming all the way down. So these are the moderate impact land uses. These are the buffers, dependent on the type, the category of wetland and habitat score. And then, like, the buffer, for example, in a category 3 wetland with a habitat score of 9 points for a unpaved trail, the buffer would be 150 feet. For a residential development that has used those best practices that we were talking about earlier, like pointing lights away, filtration of the water, it would be 225. If they opt out of doing those best practices, then it's 300 feet, is how that's read. So, and you can see, you can find the level of impact in the, is it section or is it a subsection? In the subsection of that. So here's the table in 315 of the different types of uses.
And where's the comparison to the current buffers?
So that was in a previous presentation. I don't have it in here. Stream buffers. I can, well, I guess it would be in the code. Sorry, not that code. So it's still in red lines, but you can see this is what was removed. So here's that, it's, for some reason, they did it so high to moderate impact uses, so they combined the high to moderate impact uses. So category 3 with habitat score from 8 to 9 points, high to moderate impact use was 225. Similar to what I was showing you in the revised, which you can see here. But the way they used to have it worded in the code was if an applicant chooses not to apply the mitigation measures listed in the next section, then a 33% increase in the width of all buffers is required. So if if an applicant came in and they didn't decide that they wanted to do, sorry, I'm getting there. Lots of subsections. Where is 316? Here it is. Hi, 316. They decided they didn't want to direct lights away from a wetland. Again, Darcy mentioned pesticides earlier. They decided they didn't want to do these kinds of things, then in our current code, we would have increased that by 33%. So the way we did it is putting the onus on the developer or the applicant to come in and say, okay, I'm doing these things. Here's my moderate. That's why I get the moderate now. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I think we made it through probably the least exciting changes with tonight's discussion of these 38 changes. And thank you, Darcy, for being here and for all your hard work. I think we can move
Thank you.
on from me to Tyler. Where do you want to sit? Ooh. Oh, do you need to pull something open? Is it in your presentations folder? Okay. Come on.
I haven't had it in presentations, I just had it in the file for data presentations. Oh, Jesus. I thought I just had it in the folder for the meeting tonight. I could do that. But I should really Is it okay if I open the G and pull up the spreadsheet version?
Yeah, that's fine.
Oh, okay. I could do it through the PDF, it would just be a little bit faster. I thought that it was already in there.
For people who are watching online, we are just taking a moment to find the right file to put on the screen.
All right, everyone. So we've got our annual or semi-annual housekeeping code update coming around. For anyone who is not familiar, the point of the housekeeping code code update is to go through and make the code make a little bit more sense every year. We look for things like logic errors, or pieces of code that are no longer legal under state law, essentially non-policy changes that just make the actual letter and wording of the code work better. And so we're looking to do that as usual this year, with I guess the two minor tweaks to that would be at the end of the comp plan process, we did have some comments from the Department of Commerce on some things that our code should include that are already statutorily required. They're not really policy changes, and so we felt that they could go in here. And similarly, the state legislature made regulating materials on building facades illegal in the last session, and so we have a couple of these updates to get rid of requirements on that. Again, we're not really looking at any true policy changes with any of these either. Everything here is either is either reflecting rules that have been made at the state in which we'd be held to anyway, or they're really just like fixing up logical errors or outdated things in the code. And so that is the very basic of what what the code cleanup does. Within what we have here, there's a few categories. I've got general code cleanup. I've got the Department of Commerce comments. I have clear and objective design standards, which was another state rule that I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. And then I have the code from the facade regulation restriction. So all told, there's about 20 changes. And I've got them set up here so that we have, when there's an existing code that needs to change, we have a current and proposed. When there's a code that needs to be added, it's just an add, and when there's a code that's just being removed, it's just removed. So before I get into the specifics, I did want to mention one that I put right at the top here, which is a general code cleanup item for the change for, it affects our planned unit code. And while it is a code cleanup item, it does have some bearing on the Greencastle development, or it would if they were ever to pull their application and resubmit, or if they were ever to vest to a later version of the code. And so while it does, it does meet the definition of housekeeping, I wanted to flag it because it is potentially relevant to a development. So we'll start out there first. It's the change, it's an NMC 1706080. It's a change of gross area to be net of critical areas. So when you have open space, or the rule was each PUD shall provide not less than 35% of the total gross site area for common open space. And under a previous version of this code, there was a definition for open space that allowed critical areas to be counted in it. A past housekeeping effort had removed the critical areas from the definition of open space, because if you just look at the definition of open space, it seems like the critical areas don't really fit from that because they're not supposed to be publicly accessible. And so while that code makes sense on its own now, it had the domino effect of making this code become very restrictive. So now rather than pulling out 35% of lot area in a planned unit development that included and have some of that 35% include critical areas, now none of it includes critical areas. And the thing to know about planned unit developments is that code is specifically there to help sites that have lots of critical areas on them get the most out of the developable area they do have. And so this clause is more damaging for that kind of project than it would be on pretty much any other piece in our code. And so with that in mind, we'd propose to change the sentence here to say that each PUD shall not provide less than 35% of the site area for common open space net of the critical areas, which would take it back to a similar place that it was before. So wanted to get started, and maybe we can just pause there because this one is probably the most important.
I had the benefit of hearing this explanation once before and asking lots of questions, and it took me a while to understand what this all meant. Did you follow it? Because if you have questions, I'm going to make an attempt at explaining it that may answer your questions. Okay, so let's just take an example. Let's say you have a 100-acre parcel, and 50 acres is a critical area. Our current code says you have to set aside, for planned unit development, that's what this is, only applies to planned unit development. If you're going to do a planned unit development on this 100-acre parcel, you have to set aside 35% as open space. So if there were no critical area, you would set aside 35 acres of that 100 acres. Well, let's say you have 50 acres as critical area, so that goes away. Under the current law, you have to still set aside 35% of the whole parcel. So that leaves you with only 15 acres that you can work on. The fix that is being discussed is to say that the 35% that you have to set aside of open space only applies to the buildable area. So you have, right. Does that sound right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
with it? Okay. So now I'll get into some that were addressing the Department of Commerce comments. So I'll do these next two here at the same time because they're really the same thing, just showing up in two different places.
I'm sorry, before we move on, I think we should point out that this, as Tyler mentioned in the outset, this could affect the Greencastle development. So it basically changes, this changes the rules midstream, and it could make that development work better if under this rule. It could give them more flexibility. But that's not the intent of the rule. This wasn't done in response to anything that has to do with Greencastle. It has to do with going back and fixing something that really wasn't meant to be in the first place. But just, you know, coincidentally, if that development moves forward, it gives them that more flexibility about the development. If that development goes forward, it's also going to be subject to the stricter rules for setbacks from streams. So they might get a little benefit on one side that will, yeah.
I will just clarify on that. That's assuming all of this code kind of happens at the same time. If the housekeeping happens before the critical areas code, then they would potentially be able to opt in to this code and not have to opt into the critical areas code. But they've also told me that they can't wait for 3 months to see if something potentially changes, and so they're sharpening their pencils right now on the project. So I will keep everybody, as we move forward, I'll keep everybody updated on their status, so you can let us know like how you think we should move this through.
All right. So to continue on, one of the comments we had from Department of Commerce was that there's a law in place that you can't charge early learning centers higher impact fees per square foot than you would like a similar commercial or retail use. We already don't do that, and so it seemed like something we could get to in our housekeeping. And so 1615 and 1620 are where we keep our code on impact fees for transportation and trails. And so this would put a clause in there that would say that impact fees for daycares that serve children under 13 years of age may in no instance be greater than that imposed on commercial, retail, or commercial office development activities, assuming that they all have similar impacts. Again, there's no real change here. It just meets the letter of state law a little bit more clearly. And should I just keep going now? Okay. So takings review, we had a requirement from Commerce that our code have a process to assure whether a proposed regulatory or administrative action didn't result in an unconstitutional taking of property. Takings are already something that we keep in mind in our decisions, but to comply with this, I proposed in 1907-050E to put this process in here whenever we have a regulation that might potentially restrict the economic use of any lands or waters in the city, that staff should refer to the Washington Attorney General's October 2024 advisory memorandum and recommended process for evaluating proposed regulatory or administrative actions to avoid unconstitutional takings for private property. That is quite the title. And then we can move on from there.
So we're basically updating our administrative code to include this takings review.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's see. There was also they also wanted us to make it clear, or how do make it clear that failing on-site sewage systems that are contaminating soils and waters flowing into waters of the state are a code violation. And so I propose putting it in our nuisance code. That seemed to follow well with the sorts of other things that are in that nuisance code. And yeah, that's really it. So getting into the next kind of set of these, there's a new state law, well, new to the last couple of years, that says all of our design standards must be, quote, clear and objective. So they have to be interpretable, you have to be able to read them, understand them, and essentially that any reasonable person could get some idea of what it's asking for. And our design guidelines for the downtown area in particular have many code references that don't meet that mark of objectivity. And we'll go through and you'll kind of see what I mean as we go on. So first one, in the intent section at the very top of that code, the guidelines state that they're intentionally subjective, and that when there is a conflict between the guidelines and the zoning code, the city gets to determine which regulation applies. There's no means for determining how we make that decision, we just get to do it. So we proposed that we remove the intentionally subjective, and that where the guidelines and the zoning ordinance standards conflict, that the zoning standards shall rule. And part of the reason for that would be that the zoning standards were built to be hard and fast regulations, where these guidelines were brought in as guidelines. And they're inherently a little bit harder to enforce on a building by building basis than a zoning code is. And so I think it makes logical sense to have the zoning code rule when there's a direct conflict. Okay. Yeah, let's do that. That's good. So we had another one. Parking lots must be integrated with the fabric of the community by creatively using landscaping to reduce their visual impact. Take that down to parking lots must use landscaping to reduce their visual impact, trying to preserve the meaning and the intent of the ordinance while removing editorializing in the language. So we had another one, choose secure bike racks that function well and are aesthetically pleasing when no bikes are present. Don't have a definition for function well and aesthetically pleasing is inherently subjective. We've got break up uninteresting box-like forms into smaller varied masses. I propose replacing that with break up unvarying rectilinear forms into smaller varied masses. Should have the same intent, but now we've removed the editorializing. Avoid construction that greatly varies from traditional area building heights too high or too low. And then at the end of the same clause, special attention to maintain an activated streetscape is important. To keep the intent there, while also giving a little bit more, making it a little bit more firm language than traditional area building heights. I've recommended new construction facades should generally be no more than 2 stories without vertically or horizontally or vertically articulating, to match what is there. Again, match the substance of what the code is asking or what the guidelines already said, while changing the wording to be a little bit firmer. And then changing special attention to maintain an active streetscape is important to activated streetscapes are important. Building entrance should be celebrated with key vertical and horizontal elements, lighting, accent materials. Proposed removing celebrated. Building entrances should be visually emphasized with key vertical, horizontal elements. So, let's see. When used, sustainable technologies, which in this case was talking about like green infrastructure, bioswales, that sort of thing, should be an integral part of the building's form and shall be designed as visible, iconic elements in the sidewalk environment. The planning director will make final determination as to design, integration, and appropriateness of sustainable elements. That puts a lot on the director's whim. And so I've tried to tighten it up to say when used, sustainable technologies will be visually incorporated into the structure and should serve as a visual amenity to pedestrians. Let's see. So that covers that section of elements. We're actually going to go back to 1822 in a bit. But now we'll be moving on to general code cleanup. This one is in 1505, 105.3. We had our building official notified us that this description of this requirement to describe where the land is located was just a little bit hazy by missing the parcel number, and asked that the parcel number be added to the street address. Oftentimes the parcel number is all that we have. And so we've proposed to add that. We have another one clarifying the procedure for adding soil to a site. Preparation of the ground. The ground surface shall be prepared to receive fill by removing vegetation and unsuitable soil and material such as concrete, rubber, topsoil, tree stumps, brush. Where slopes receiving fill are steeper than 5 horizontal to 1 vertical, filled material shall be benched into sound bedrock. And our public works team has recommended that or undisturbed native soil could also work in this case, and that is kind of been our current practice. We have a reference here to the Uniform Administrative Code. The Uniform Administrative Code, Uniform Fire Code, Uniform Building Code are all older versions of the building code that were phased out nationally and in Newcastle, I think in the late 1990s. They've since been replaced, and I tried to go through and find all of the last references to them. So proposing to get rid of it from 1806-080, which is in the definition of the building official. We will keep seeing those. The front lot line. So a couple of years ago, we were having a challenge with determining the front lot line and setbacks. And so we, in a past code cleanup effort, changed the definition of the front lot line when you have a flag lot to make the front lot line, or make the front setback come out at an angle after when the narrow portion of the lot ends and the wide portion begins. The code does that, but it also, the way it was written also does kind of give the implication that not just the front setback needs to have this angle to it, but that the whole front lot line needs to be angled, which was not the intention and is not the case. So this just clarifies it a little bit. Says that the front lot line shall be established for the purpose of determining the front setback on those flag lots by first placing a point parallel to the vehicular access and essentially building that diagonal. There's no meaningful change to the definition, it just clarifies it. We wanted to remove the definition for semi-pervious surface. Our definition for impervious surface includes semi-pervious surface in it, and it also says how to regulate a semi-pervious surface. So having the separate definition is not really needed. Could have it, it's just a bit redundant. In our definition of a temporary use permit, we wanted to add an extra clarification that temporary uses include but not limited to special events. We often use the temporary use permit for special events, and this just makes it a little bit faster read and interpretation for people to see it explicit there. We had a request to add a definition for a tiny house on wheels. This doesn't change how tiny houses are allowed or really regulated in the code, but it will at least allow our code to know when it sees one. Because right now, a tiny house on wheels doesn't, it's something that exists, but you wouldn't know it if you read our code, and it would be very ambiguous what to call it or what to do with it.
We still need to talk about regulation of tiny houses though, right? Yeah.
Right, I don't think we could go beyond putting a definition of what a tiny house on wheels is in an update like this.
Yep.
Well, I'm not saying that we do. This would be just to say, so that we recognize, or so that our code recognizes one. It wouldn't say whether we approve of it or not. But this is a size that they kind of tend to be. The term tiny is apt.
Does anybody know how 400 square feet translates into something that, well, so for a travel trailer, is that a pretty big travel trailer that you'd, so it's a pretty big, yeah. Does this definition, do we have a definition for a mobile home?
I believe so.
I believe it might be under recreational vehicle. Oh, wait, we do have mobile homes, because we have mobile home code.
Just wondered how this differs from the mobile home definition.
Yeah, what's the distinction between a tiny house and a mobile home?
We've-
Or an RV?
Well, a tiny house is designed so that you could keep it there permanently and that it wouldn't degrade in the same way that an RV does.
Yeah, it doesn't have a permanent foundation.
It would have a permanent foundation?
It doesn't.
It does
And
not.
then recreational vehicles in our code can only be used for short-term, like you can't have somebody living in an RV on your property, for example.
But a tiny house on wheels is an RV.
Well, that's the question. Is it?
But I think this definition says a tiny house is something that is meant for long-term residence. So.
Potato,
like-
potato, I don't see.
Well, right now, there's no difference, but there could be a difference when we start talking about regulating tiny homes. So this is a step toward a bigger discussion that we'll have later.
I was looking this up, but a semi-truck trailer is typically 48 feet long by 8.5 feet wide, which is 408 square feet. So it's about a semi-truck trailer.
We also don't have a tiny home definition, so if we're gonna do tiny home on wheels, we might need to do tiny home.
That does stand to reason.
Yeah. Or we could table this until we work on regulating the tiny homes.
Yeah, because I have a lot of questions on tiny. I have no idea how that one works. Yeah, we should table it. Yeah.
Should we remove
Should-
the definition
yeah.
from the, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was about to ask that. Should we remove that one from the cleanup?
probably because if there's no regulations, there's no use for it yet. Until we have a regulation, there's no use for a definition, correct? Yeah. So we don't need it now.
Okay. Sounds good.
Commissioner Blocker?
And when we get around to that, I think I'm a little confused about what an ADU is going to be compared to a tiny home on wheels. What's going to be the distinction? What are the requirements in terms of sewage, water, hookups, things like that? So, I mean, hopefully that'll be part of the future discussion, I guess.
All right. So we'll table that one for now. So in our code on when you require replacement trees to be planted. So our code generally requires replacement trees after you cannot preserve more than, or 25% or more of the significant trees on your lot. And significant trees are most healthy trees that are either 8 inches wide or bigger if they're hardwoods, if they're softwoods, or 12 inches wide or bigger around if they're hardwoods. So in the event that you fail to hit that, our code will then say that you need to plant replacement trees. In 1816-170 here. This code, though, has also had, it has this subclause in it that when the required number of significant trees or mature trees cannot be retained or native vegetation has been cleared from an area that exceeds 2,500 square feet, then that would also seem to trigger the replanting requirements. But that's never been the practice, and that was not the intention when the code update that made this current code was passed. We're not exactly sure what it does in here. And so we were proposing to remove this subclause because it just doesn't really make sense in the context of the broader code. It's a bit of a mystery why it's in here at all to begin with.
For just a little bit of context, our code doesn't have landscaping requirements. Like generally when you develop a property in Newcastle, like if you rebuild your home or whatnot, we don't have requirements for certain types of vegetation. So if you clear 2,500 square feet of native vegetation, we don't have anything in our code that says you have to replace that, unless that's what subsection C below was saying, and I'm mistaken. But it doesn't have anything to do with significant trees. Significant trees and native vegetation don't. Like when you take out a significant tree, the replacement isn't native vegetation, it's another tree, for example.
Okay. Yeah. We'll take it on out. So we're going to go back to 1822, the design, the urban design guidelines, but I guess you could say for a happy reason this time. So proposed to remove the clause in 1822-030B4, which says concentrate multifamily residential development on the Peterson property to maximize open space and preserve sensitive areas. The reason I'm proposing to remove this is that that is now the Aegis property and that is mission accomplished. That was done in all respects. And so there's nothing left to do with that code as best I can tell. And so I propose to retire it. Same idea, but on a little bit bigger scale. proposed to remove the whole section for 18.22.040. This section is about how to redevelop what was at the time the Brickyard site, which is now the Newcastle Commons. If you go and look through those, through the vision in those, in that part of the code, we actually did a pretty nice job. I think, as far as what went in there was like what was called for. And so, and this area is now fully developed. The Commons is fundamentally different than the before condition that this code imagined. And its after conditions largely been met. So I would say that the code is essentially a piece of history at this point. And I think it's a successful history, but either way, I would think it's probably time to retire it as well.
What happens with old code history? Are there copies of, like, will a copy
Yep.
of this be retained?
Yeah, we have
Somewhere.
copies of every code through city history, and when I have questions, I get to go back through them. We have another reference to the Uniform Fire and Building Codes. I would like to fix it. We have another reference to the Uniform Fire Code. I'd like to fix it. So, what was this? So this one could have been a general code cleanup comment. It could have been a, I could have also categorized it as a commerce request. And that is our definition of an essential public facility is missing a little bit of the state required definition. I think because the state required definition of it had an update. And all that, this thing is big. All that changed was that it built out a little bit more of what the term difficult to cite means. So when you're in our essential public facility, essential public facilities are essentially those things that are necessary to the region, but are difficult to cite. Your waste management facilities, your places where you store, like, how would I say this? Your waste management, what? Public works shops, waste management. It can be behavioral facilities, correctional facilities. It's a whole set of things that are notoriously difficult to locate, and so the state has created a separate process for those facilities. That process is already in our code. The only difference here is that when you're looking at the criterion in our current code for what can be defined as an essential public facility, we have here in section C that the facility is of a type that has been difficult to cite in the past, and the updated state rule just builds that out a little bit. It says, one or more of the following conditions is sufficient to make it difficult to cite. And that would be that the public facility needs to be a specific type of site, such as size, location, available public surfaces for which there are few choices. The public facility needs to be located near another public facility or is an expansion of an essential public facility at an existing location. The public facility has or is generally perceived by the public to have significant adverse impacts that make it difficult to cite. Use of normal development review process would effectively preclude the citing of an essential public facility, and development regulations require the proposed facility to use an essential public facility citing process. And these are all, I just lifted that straight out of the Washington Administrative Code, section 365-196-550, so that our definition will match the state's. And I believe we'll be held to it in either case, should one of these ever come around. So, let me go on. In our platting, our code on platting, or in subdivisions, we propose to remove the requirement that plats show building setbacks on them. The reason for that is just that we had a legal recommendation against putting setback lines on plats because plat conditions are separate from the rest of your city code. We're essentially locking in our standards on setbacks in time, and in a way that if we were to ever, change those, we would be stuck enforcing the stricter of the two between whatever the city's standard was in the future and whatever this old plat map said. And so just to remove that potential headache, we suggest to not show the setbacks on the plat because they'll be enforced as they are in the current code regardless. We have another uniform fire code and uniform building code reference. I'd like to fix it. Let's see. So, and now we're at these last couple at the bottom, which I had classified as illegal code. These are violations of the state law that now restricts cities from regulating building cladding materials. So we can't restrict the use of plastic, bright, unfinished metal, untreated wood, and false stone in the downtown area. That's back to the design standards or the design guidelines. Still in those, it says the use of T11 or similar sheet materials, stucco, clad foam, EIFS siding. Vinyl siding and log constructions incompatible should be prohibited. We can't say that anymore. And then we had another one that was similar, but we could keep the intention, I think. And that was a wainscots or kick plates below storefront windows made of brick, stone, frame, panel, wood, or similar products that create texture, pattern, and shadows are encouraged, essentially, is the context of that. And so, yeah.
Any idea why the state changed that ability to regulate that?
Yeah,
What was the argument?
So that would have been part of the broader push at the state level to have cities streamline their design guidelines. It's in the same general vein of thought as the rule that you can only have like one design review meeting, for example. They're trying to limit things that make projects much more expensive to build, either by adding on copious delay or by requiring only the most expensive materials. You can agree with it or disagree with it, but that's I think where their logic was coming from there. And I've actually seen other states pass similar rules. So yeah, that's where that's coming from.
I do believe there were exceptions specifically made for Leavenworth and, was it Western themed
Oh,
towns?
no, that's right. They made an
Yes.
exception. Yeah, I wish I could remember the exact words, but it was essentially for like for a town of under 2,500 people with a Bavarian design theme. Yes. Unfortunately, the one that styles themselves in the Wild West didn't have a good lobbyist, I guess, so they didn't get one. But Winthrop did not get it. I thought they should have. Gonna need to add that in there. But anyhow. So yes, if we say wainscots or kick plates below storefront windows be made of products that create texture, pattern, or shadow lines, I think that we're compliant with the current state law and keeping the same spirit of the code. And that does it for the main event of the night. That is all of the proposed code changes. Does anyone have any other questions or comments about the set?
So the next step on this will be to look at an actual red line and then pass a motion to recommend it to the city council. So that would be at our next meeting and probably be a quick item.
All right, sounds good.
Thank you. Oh, and by the way, nice job on trying to, and wordsmithing those subjective design words into something that it was objective. Very good substitutes that you proposed.
Oh,
Yeah, nice
well,
work.
thank you.
So I'm just doing a time check. It's 8 o'clock. Do you want to move on to the next item?
So the next item is the nonconformance code. You guys, you want to keep going? I don't think it'll be too quick, but I'd say it'll be half an hour at least.
I could ask I could start by asking some questions and see if people have a feeling, commissioners have a feeling about something.
Well,
We could kind of start backwards in a way.
Yeah, well, let's take a run at it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. Sorry, I just don't want to mess up. Tyler, save. Okay. So, close all these. Presentations. So, what I was really because as you saw in the packet, there's a lot of different. We could really expand the scope of this code update for nonconformance, and I was really just trying to get a feeling before we dive into a nonconformance code update. What I know that the natural disasters is definitely one that we need to address. But did you see others that you thought were worthy of consideration, or that you really felt like, yeah, we should add that to our code? And that's really the crux of what I wanted to get to on this conversation. And I had just thrown out there, I don't know if everybody's here has read the purpose. There's a purpose section in our zoning code, and why do we actually, and what are we actually trying to do? So it's protection of general public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and to implement the comp plan. So I provided some example municipal codes, which included Kirkland's code, which is relatively new, and for the size of the city, I felt like it was relatively detailed. Renton, which was very short, and then Seattle, which understandably has a lot of nuance in its code. And again, the similarities between the three were that we had, acts of nature. Again, Kirkland was the most restrictive with that, with 6 months limitation for building permit, 50% assessed value. Discontinued use is addressed in all codes. 90 days after discontinued use in Kirkland, you could no longer have that non-conforming use. The structure could remain, the use would not be able to remain. And then they talked about access easements, which was interesting to me. I had never thought about non-conforming access easements. But I guess that just requires folks to update their language in easements for platting purposes. But they all three or at least two of them talked about it. And I'm kind of giving you the abridged version of this presentation, but I just wanted to kind of provide you with some context that what we find mostly with the nonconformance codes, it has to do with single-family home renovations these days. They're just, the assessed value at 200,000 doesn't really let you do very much. And so while there's a benefit to having thresholds for nonconformance and allowing, and because then over time, your city develops in a way that it wants to. And it does take a long time for development to occur. It's better for the environment. Of course, it can be a lot harder on the property owner if they not only have to think about, okay, I want to do an addition, but because that addition is worth $200,000, I also have to reduce the amount of impervious surface on my lot, for example. And just one like cautionary tale that I'm sure maybe you saw from reading these is, or reading other portions of our code, is that a code that is too broad and a code that's too narrow can be very difficult to implement. So I'm hoping that whatever we implement, I mean, the sky's the limit on it, but that it's usable and it's appropriate for what we actually see in the city. So again, my questions are really on what topics we should address for the nonconforming uses. Natural disasters, acts of nature would be, of course, my first. But what level of detail do we want to get into for redevelopment of properties? It could be that once the appraised value, we saw it in Kirkland, once the appraised value of a property, half of the appraised value. So we could just change the 50% from assessed of the structure to total assessed or appraised value of the property or something like that. So you would get, so if you were going to have a $1.1 million appraised value on your property, then a $500,000 renovation would be a lot different than if you're using assessed value. Some cities looked at landscaping, parking. Personally, I would be interested in non-conforming uses and when they expire, because that's not very clear in our code. And then one that came up in Seattle was when you bring a property even into conformance for uses, they were saying, well, if it's non-residential, you have to bring everything up to code. But for converting any use to a single-family home, the whole thing doesn't have to be up to code, basically. They were saying that if you're going to change it into housing for single-family home, that's fine. You can just change the use. So I thought that was really interesting, kind of caveat. So now that I've said that, I'm going to be quiet and see if anybody had any thoughts from going through the materials on anything that resonated or you think that we should focus on.
Well, one thought I have is that at this stage, let's just confine our attention to houses, to residential. This came up because of the concern about the buffers. And I think the commercial non-conforming questions are a lot more complicated. And if we get into that, it'll take us a long time to get through it. We could address the commercial non-conforming at the same time we do the downtown design standards. So we're all sort of in that downtown mindset while we go through it. Okay, so the commission agrees with that. Then I have a question for you. Of the 3 examples that you gave us, does one of them exemplify what you think is a good balance in terms of implementing it between too broad and too narrow?
I I mean, I think I would go somewhere between, I mean, I could definitely see, there were a lot of codes out there like ours or like Renton's, but I could see taking from Kirkland and maybe even some ideas from Seattle, again, in terms of how they regulate use and how they can encourage housing just by regulating use. I would keep it more on the Renton end than the Seattle end, though I think that's but it makes sense for Seattle, right? They have a lot of different types of neighborhoods and old historic buildings and, I don't know. Tyler, do you have any thoughts?
I guess I was more hoping to just hear what the conversation went, because I mean, the only things that I was really strong on were the ability to redevelop in the footprint. I think that's a big one. I do think that you might want to, getting rid of or maybe finding a way out of the 50% requirement in these like force majeure kind of events, or, burn down, earthquake, that sort of thing. But after those two, though, I actually get a lot more, like, I can kind of see it going different ways. And so I don't have the most useful opinions on this one.
I will say something that I appreciated was the way that Kirkland pulled out some of these immediate compliance required. This would help with code enforcement where they talk about noise, lighting, emission standards, water quality, even noxious odors. Having a singular code to point to and say this has to stop immediately is actually, from a code enforcement standpoint, it's helpful.
Commissioner Blocker.
Yeah, I kind of hesitate to bring this up, but because I think we've already dealt with it in housing, but there are kind of boarding house uses of houses and shared housing and things that we dealt with in housing. But in my mind, some of those kinds of things in single-family residential neighborhoods are kind of non-conforming uses. And I'm wondering, I mean, like the person right next to me, I keep coming back to that when people come zipping up, they park the wrong way on the street all the time. They park both sides of the street. It kind of constricts traffic. They got, one guy doesn't use the front door. He's got a garage door half open 24/7. And he crawls under the door to live in the basement. And I just don't, those don't seem like conforming uses of a single-family residential neighborhood home. And I don't know that we didn't deal with it in the housing, under the boarding house kind of concept or whatever. But it just seems like, yeah, something's a little cockeyed about that. And the owner's not even residential in state. I mean, he's clear out of state. Things don't get maintained. It's really kind of weird. I don't know how that comes into this non-conforming use.
Well, that might play, there are property maintenance codes and occupancy for health and safety. But this may be an opportunity, kind of like they did in Kirkland, and they brought up the noise standards, the lighting, to kind of create like a reference location for property maintenance standards. I'm not saying as a department, I'm eager to go track down every house that has grass that's, looks more like a meadow, but in a situation like that where it could be unsafe housing conditions, I think that is something we could look at.
I agree that what you described is a problem, but I don't know if that's the same issue that we're dealing with here, because we're talking about what about legal non-conforming uses, and you were describing what might be illegal non-conforming uses. So we're trying to figure out what should be, continue to be allowed to be non-conforming that's already, it's already legally non-conforming.
Yeah, well, I guess the part that, I agree with what you're saying, but it's two sides of the same coin. If it's not legal, it's illegal, or if it's illegal, it's not legal. So I'm just kind of scratching my head. How does it get dealt with? The guy never mows the grass, blackberries come over the fence at me all the time, and it's kind of like, anyway, you get the drift.
One quick question. So also, will we be covering, you know how we were talking about with some of the residents that they would like to have their properties grandfathered in because they were, so will this, when we come to this non-conforming use, will we be also maybe addressing some of those concerns?
This is going to be separate. The critical areas code specifically talks to, we would reference the critical areas code for non-conforming uses, but that's more where we were talking earlier in the critical areas discussion about reusing the existing footprint and then being able to have additions in the already disturbed areas, basically.
So your feeling is that the language in the critical areas ordinance addresses the concerns that were brought up by the people who were worried about the buffers?
Yes, that would be the intent, would be to address that specifically in the critical areas code. And I think as we get into the streams discussion next month, hopefully we'll talk about that particular part a little bit more after we've talked with DFW to see what they're telling us.
Question for you. If you're doing an addition on a house, like adding square footage, and it's, the measure now is at 50%, that kicks it into either it needs to conform or it doesn't need to conform. Is there some other measure besides dollars that could be used? Like, I mean, couldn't the new addition just be conforming to the new code and the rest of it stays the same? Or like why? I mean, when the addition's, you know, half the value,
Yeah.
why does like impervious surface for the whole property now have to get reevaluated? Kind
Well,
of thing, or parking spaces, everything kicks in. It's like, it seems like, can't we limit it to just the thing that's getting built, the piece of it somehow? I don't know. I'm just throwing this out here.
Well, it could. Impervious surface, that would be a hard one because that's really taken at a property level.
Yeah, yeah.
Parcel level, but parking, for instance. Yeah, actually, and that's something that Tyler and I were talking about earlier, is that in that use discussion, and also in terms of accessory structures, they allow accessory structures, they have to be conforming even if the existing building is non-conforming. So they allow the non-conforming building to be built, and then you can have your accessory structure. And they don't talk about the value of it. They just, so, I mean, yeah, I think there are a lot of things that we could talk about accessory structures and how we want to look at that. You know, Tyler brought this up earlier, but about, you know, clearing but it didn't make sense in the tree retention code, but sort of the clearing of the 2,500 square feet or more of native area. That kind of makes me think about landscaping. We don't really have landscaping requirements in the city.
So for for like renting, what's the trigger for a residential that kicks it into non-conforming?
Okay.
Is it dollars or something else? Do you know?
shall not exceed an aggregate cost of 40%, 12 months, or 60% and 48 months of the value of the structure, based on its most recent assessment or appraisal, unless the change makes the structure more conforming or are used to restore a safe condition in any portion of a structure declared unsafe by the building official. So I see appraisals and assessments, valuations used a lot. We used to in California too. I think because building valuation is a common way to look at fees. So there's always, building valuations and increases are always available to jurisdictions. So I think maybe that's part of it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm just trying to think, I don't know, differently about it maybe. But I don't have an answer either, so.
Yeah. And if there's a way you think we should, just thinking about your daily work lives or previous work lives, if you happen to be retired, luckily, are there ways, because this is really brainstorming, right? Like, we're just trying to think about what we actually want to regulate and beyond just the hazardous situations. Maybe there's a better way to do this. Like, should it come back with charts and boards, and do we want to do more active session to really think about different scenarios? I can't say that since I've been here, I've actually been able to work on a project that wasn't state mandated, state regulated, I've just been doing what the state tells me to do for the last 2 years. So it's interesting, right? This is a whole new thing.
It seems like we started delving into this because there were some problems that we needed to solve. One was the one in critical areas. Another one was, and I don't know if I'm describing this right, but we didn't want to discourage, we wanted to make it easier for people to stay in their houses. And somehow our non-conforming codes were discouraging that in some cases. I don't know if a third one was that our code didn't recognize natural disasters as a special case. Is that true? That
Yeah, it's overly restrictive. It's on a lot of levels. Mm-hmm.
So
Simple.
one way we could approach this is just to take a minimalist approach. Let's just address those things that have come up as problems,
Mm-hmm.
and as a basis, and then if there is something that you think you'd really like to see because it would make administration more fair or efficient, then add those things, and that becomes that's the circle we draw around how much work we want to do.
Okay.
Commissioner Blocker?
Yeah, I like that proposal. And then if you just do like you've kind of been doing, pull up other municipalities and kind of mine their non-conforming codes that they've got for things that interest you in the guise of what Charlie just suggested, for making your job better, as well as possibly something that we missed that they thought of.
Okay. So keep it to residential, trying to make it easier for people to stay in their homes, and then addressing the natural disasters. And take it from there. I see nods.
Commissioners, does that sound okay to you?
Right. Thank you, guys.
Right. So that takes us through 8.3 on our agenda. We are now at the point of having, and we're at the point of having additional public comment, but we have no public with us in the chambers here, so we can dispense with that agenda item, and that takes us to the planning calendar. And I think the only thing here two things. One is, remember, our meeting in December is not at the usual time, it's a week in advance, 17th. And then the second thing, that we've kicked around the idea, or it has been suggested by a commissioner that, or maybe it was by a member of the audience, that there be some kind of a workshop about the buffers and the law.
That's right.
Now that we've had a little more discussion about that, does anybody have any thoughts about whether or not we either need or should have any kind of a workshop? Commissioner Blocker?
If my recollection was right, there was a reference made at the beginning of the meeting about a new mapping, some sort of a mapping that was going to show every property owner the potential effects on. If that comes out and they have that, and we have that, it might be very reasonable to consider some sort of a workshop or interactive kind of informational meeting. But I think having that map to work with so that people can point to their lot, their situation, or whatever.
For the dashboard.
When do you think we'll have that?
That would be completed in January. So,
And in December, we'll be talking about streams. Well, we could discuss this question again in December and put off any kind of decision until January.
yeah.
Well, and the buffers for the wetlands aren't really changing. So it's really gonna be the streams, right, that'll possibly have an impact. So yeah, I think we need to figure that out, have the map, and then see if it makes sense to have a workshop or something,
Yeah.
in my mind.
It was like 500 people or lots or something they made reference to one time.
Do you want to turn on your microphone?
I think at one time you made a reference to the fact it was something like about 500 properties or lots that potentially were impacted. Is that right?
That's
Or is-
who were within that 50-foot buffer that we mailed to. So we ended up doing a mailing to 500,
Yeah.
about 500 homes. And the real impacts will be better understood once we have this map. And it can show the difference.
That's a lot of people. I think there'd be a lot of interest.
Yeah. I'm hoping that we can come up with exceptions in such a way that, we retain the no net loss and are able to make it digestible for those who are potentially affected by any recommended stream changes. So, and of course, we are dealing with a bit of a deadline because we have grant applications coming up, so. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention though is that I just realized that we have to have a 2026 work plan for council, for the new council. So I haven't been Scott hasn't brought up with me when we would be, I don't know if we're gonna have a joint meeting. Sometimes those have happened, I think those have happened as late as February, is that right, Charlie?
It's It's happened more times in January than in February, but it can be either month.
Okay. I think last year we just did it on a consent calendar because we knew we were working on comp plan and middle housing regulations. So I'll bring something in December for you all to check out, but I haven't heard that anybody's chomping at the bit to see our work plan either, so.
I don't think they ever have been chomping at the bit.
Okay. All right.
All right, any other questions, thoughts, comments about calendar? All right, then we will adjourn. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.